Okay, let's unpack this. What if the world, I mean, at its most basic level, isn't really designed for our comfort? For easy happiness.
Right.
What if it actually operates by some, well, incredibly harsh, unflinching rules, a bit like the indifferent forces you see in nature? The source we're diving into today, it kicks off with exactly that kind of provocative idea. It echoes an old concept. Heaven and earth are not humane, treating the myriad things as straw dogs.
It's quite a statement to start with.
It is, and the source itself gives a fair warning. Grappling with this viewpoint might be challenging if you tend to be, well, maybe soft-hearted or hold more extreme views.
It's definitely a bold starting point. And what's interesting, I think, is how the source uses that ancient phrase not just as a hook, but to frame its whole argument.
Oh, so.
It reflects a deeper truth about existence, that the world, in its raw state, operates on principles that prioritize survival, adaptation, fundamental processes really over individual well-being or any sense of fairness we might project onto it.
So indifferent, not actually malicious.
Exactly. That's the key distinction the source seems to make. Indifferent.
Right. And this single source, it looks like an article, maybe a transcript. It takes that core idea and just runs with it. It explores how these seemingly harsh rules might play out across, well, all sorts of aspects of life.
Yeah, from the natural world itself to our societies, our own psychology, relationships.
Even seeing society as a kind of energy field, which sounds fascinating.
It does. So our mission here in this deep dive is to really get into the specific perspective from the source. We want to pull out the core insights, maybe some points that are surprisingly relevant today, and help you understand this particular viewpoint on how the world, according to the source, operates.
Okay, so let's follow the source's structure then. It starts with the most obvious place, nature itself, looking at biology. And it describes nature not as, a gentle garden, but more like a silent documentary.
A silent documentary, I like that. It implies observation without judgment.
Exactly. But a brutal one. It shows, truthfully, survival of the fittest.
Yeah, it's a stark image. The source uses some really visceral examples like a lion hunting a gazelle.
Right.
And importantly, doesn't frame the lion as evil or cruel. It just highlights the raw, intense struggle, the lion's focus, the gazelle's desperation.
And the outcome.
The outcome is framed as just sheer, unavoidable necessity. Survival for one means the end for another. It's not personal, it's systemic.
And it's not just about predators, is it? The source points to competition everywhere.
Absolutely. Like the quiet but fierce battle between plants in a forest. They're all fighting for sunlight.
You see vines literally climbing over other plants to get higher.
Yeah, while the smaller ones underneath just struggle for whatever light filters down. And those that can't adapt, that lose that fight for resources.
They just wither,
Yeah.
become nutrients for the system.
Exactly. They become nutrients for the very system that, in a sense, eliminated them. The striking insight here, according to the source, isn't that this is some sad side effect. It's that this intense, relentless competition is a fundamental, cold governing rule of the natural world.
It just is.
It just is.
Okay, so that naturally leads the source to its next big question. If that's how nature works, how much of that still influences us, human society, despite, civilization, ethics, all our rules?
And the source argues pretty strongly that the influence is deep. It even compares the modern workplace to a kind of battlefield.
Or a jungle.
A jungle, yeah. It talks about fierce competition for jobs. I like the imagery it used, people trying to get hired, being like crossing a river,
Yeah.
many struggling just to get across.
That's vivid. And once you're in, the source says the rivalry just continues for performance, for promotions.
And because those things, jobs, promotions, opportunities are limited.
Right, scarcity drives the behavior. The source sees a direct result. People working excessively, long hours. It mentions the Chinese phrase, lahai dagelo, juben dajiding.
Meaning working overtime, putting in extra time.
Yeah, leading to more stress, and often people sacrificing our health. The source actually notes that many get lost in this workplace marathon, or they end up paying a pretty serious health price.
And you see the same kind of pressure cooker environment, the source argues, in education too.
Oh, definitely. It paints a picture that feels, well, familiar globally, doesn't it? Students with heavy bags, school plus tutoring, extra classes.
Starting this intense academic competition really young, giving up playtime just to study, often just aiming for that one goal.
Yeah.
Get into a good school.
And the parents are right there in it. The source calls it an education arms race. detailing the huge investments, money, effort, buying homes in specific school districts, all the tutoring, talent training, even international trips.
It's immense pressure. And the source offers a critical take on this, suggesting that this hyper-focus on competition, on achievement, might actually stifle curiosity and creativity, the very things education should nurture.
Yeah, it feels like the purpose gets kind of blurred, right? Lost in the chase for status and exam results.
Right. And the source traces this societal mirroring of the jungle back to that core conflict again. Limited resources versus individual desire.
Limited wealth, positions, status, versus everyone's basic drive to survive and, well, get ahead.
Exactly. And that tension, it argues, naturally pushes people towards self-interest, sometimes over collective balance, which leads to stratification, wealth gaps, strained relationships.
But it's important you mentioned the source adds a counterpoint here. It doesn't say we're just animals.
Crucially, no. It emphasizes that humans have reason. We have ethics. We aren't purely driven by instinct.
So we should be striving for something more.
Yes. The source suggests we should aim for fairness, sustainability, using our unique human abilities alongside that drive for development.
Okay, now here's where it gets, I think, really interesting for a lot of people. The source takes this jungle law idea and applies it directly to business and careers, how it plays out day to day.
Right, it describes the business world as not just competitive, but a jungle full of hidden dangers.
Hidden dangers.
Yeah, implying that the competition isn't always overt, but it's fierce.
Yeah.
And large companies, they're portrayed as the dominant beasts.
Using their size, their resources, their tech advantage to, well, dominate.
Exactly. Think about economies of scale. They can lower costs, drive down prices.
Making it incredibly tough for smaller businesses, the SMEs.
Immense pressure.
Yeah.
Or they use huge R&D budgets, powerful branding, to just push smaller players out entirely. The source uses the tech industry as a prime example.
Oh, yes, the internet giants.
It points to how they use data, algorithms, massive resources to expand so fast across so many sectors: e-commerce, social media, finance, travel.
Making it almost impossible for startups to survive, let alone thrive.
It's incredibly difficult. And then bringing it back to the individual career path. The workplace is explicitly called a competitive arena, governed by this jungle law.
And promotions are limited. The source calls them, quite brutally, blood-sucking resources.
Oof, yeah, that's harsh. Resources that employees fight fiercely for.
And according to this perspective, who wins?
Well, the source suggests it's the people seen as highly capable, the consistent top performers, or maybe those with strong connections. They succeed, they advance.
And the average employee.
The source suggests they risk being gradually eliminated, or just left behind in this competitive environment.
Which creates this constant pressure cooker.
Leading employees, as the source describes it, to work desperately, constantly upskilling, just trying to keep up.
Sacrificing time, sacrificing health.
Yes, the long overtime, the high stress, the exhaustion, all just to avoid being the one who gets eliminated. It's a survival mechanism in that context.
So the source sums up the impact of this. This relentless competition in business and careers. It sees both sides, right? It does. It acknowledges it can stimulate progress, innovation. But at the same time, it creates deep stratification. It widens the wealth gap.
Leads to unfairness for the less powerful, the less resourced.
And fosters these cold, utilitarian relationships where people are valued more for their output or connections than anything else, which, the source argues, really challenges social cohesion.
But again, it brings back that human element. It doesn't just leave us in the jungle.
No, echoing the earlier point, it strongly reiterates human society is different. We have reason, we have ethics.
We must use things like laws, social safety nets, educational fairness.
To build something better, a more just, harmonious environment. The goal shouldn't just be letting the strongest win at everyone else's expense. Development should benefit everyone.
Okay. Let's shift gears quite dramatically now. The source turns inward. It suggests that this idea, heaven and earth are not humane, is also mirrored inside us, in our psyche.
Specifically in what it calls the abyss of human desire.
That feels very, very relevant today. The source talks about modern consumer society.
Fueled by media, advertising.
Constantly making us want more. Overinflated desire for luxury goods, cars, bigger houses, often tied, subtly or not, to proving our value or status.
And it's not just stuff, is it? The source points to the desire for power, position, in the workplace, maybe in politics, again, linked to status, control.
Even online, that relentless chase for likes, followers, validation.
Yeah, the source sees that reflecting a deep need for recognition, which can easily slide into vanity.
And the core insight here from the source is that when we're always chasing this external stuff,
We often neglect our deeper inner needs.
exactly, leaving people feeling, well, lost, kind of directionless, even if they look successful on the outside.
And this unmet desire, or maybe just unmanageable inflated desire, the source connects it directly to psychological problems.
Significant problems. Anxiety, for one, from that constant tension, the fear of failing, of losing what you have.
Depression, too. A loss of interest, self-denial, feeling worthless. And chronic stress, often tied to this relentless pursuit, leading to physical issues. Burnout, insomnia, headaches, digestive problems. The list goes on.
The source even briefly connects this to some psychological theories and mentions Freud's id, ego, superego.
Right, suggesting imbalance there leads to problems. And it references Jung, too, the idea that our desires aren't purely personal. They're shaped unconsciously by the collective, by culture, tradition.
Wow. Okay, so if desire is this deep abyss, how does the source suggest we navigate it? How do we find peace?
It doesn't offer easy answers, but it does suggest several paths, ways to cope to find inner peace.
What's the first step?
One key idea is examining your own thought patterns, your beliefs. It sounds a bit like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
Right, identifying those unreasonable desires or biases.
Exactly, the ones driving the dissatisfaction, and then actively working to adjust your thinking to reduce their negative impact.
Does it give an example?
Yes, a practical one. If your overwhelming desire for material things comes from, say, deep insecurity or vanity, try deliberately cultivating gratitude.
Focusing on what you have.
Precisely. Actively appreciating what you already possess can be surprisingly powerful in lessening that constant craving for more.
That makes sense. What else?
Setting realistic goals, smaller goals. This helps avoid the anxiety that comes from always aiming impossibly high. Achieving smaller wins builds confidence without that crushing pressure.
And it recommends healthy habits too, doesn't it? Things for the inner self.
Absolutely. Things like meditation, focusing on the present, becoming aware of your thoughts without getting swept away by them, yoga for stress release, finding balance.
Or creative outlets.
Yes, reading, painting, anything that enriches your inner world, provides self-expression, makes you less reliant on external validation for your sense of self-worth.
So the conclusion on this point is quite hopeful then.
It is.
Yeah.
The source suggests that by practicing these methods, you can build genuine inner strength. You can stay clear-headed amidst all the external pressures. And, crucially, you can learn to transform desire.
Not get rid of it, but transform it.
Transform it from a potentially destructive force into one that fuels personal growth and helps you find inner harmony.
Okay, moving on again. Another complex area the source tackles through this same lens, constant change, challenge, reflecting that heaven and earth are not humane idea, is gender relations.
A big topic.
It highlights this fundamental clash we see everywhere between traditional views and more modern perspectives.
Traditional being, often fixed roles, male-dominated structures.
Yeah.
Marriage is maybe more of a practical contract.
Driven by family or social pressure, versus modern views emphasizing equality, freedom, respect.
And women seeking that balance between career and family, demanding equal status. It's a huge shift from dependence towards equality and independence.
And this shift, the source argues, brings real challenges to modern relationships.
Definitely. Economic pressure is a big one mentioned. Things like huge mortgages, the cost of living. The source calls it a hidden killer.
Causing conflict between couples.
Yeah. And social mobility means people's paths can diverge. Plus, external temptations, amplified by social media, making affairs maybe more visible or accessible, putting strain on families.
The source uses Japan as a specific case study here, which is fascinating.
It is. It talks about the economic context there, the stagnation, social pressures, describing it as becoming a kind of low-desire society, especially among the young.
And how that's changed attitudes towards marriage and dating.
Profoundly, it seems.
Yeah.
Much less enthusiasm for traditional marriage. Young people often choosing to delay it or just opting out altogether, prioritizing independence.
Are there numbers on this?
The source mentions data points, yes. Declining marriage rates, falling birth rates, more young people living alone or staying with parents longer.
Then the reasons cited.
Primarily the economic burden of family, the intense workplace competition we talked about, and just general uncertainty about the future. Marriage and kids can feel like huge restrictions in that context.
So single life seems easier, freer.
Later, perhaps. Freer, by comparison. But this raises important questions for society as a whole, doesn't it?
Which the source points out, the consequences.
Yeah, like a rapidly aging population, potential labor shortages down the line, huge pressure on social security systems.
So it prompts a reflection. How do we balance it all? Personal freedom, development, versus relationships, family, the future of society.
It's a massive balancing act.
So acknowledging all these challenges in gender relations, the source doesn't just leave us there, right? It offers some ways forward.
Thankfully, yes. It suggests some practical ways people can try to navigate these shifting tides and build stronger relationships despite the pressures.
What's key?
Good communication is central, but not just talking. It means honestly expressing your own feelings, needs, expectations,
And listening.
and actively listening. Patiently trying to understand your partner's perspective. When conflicts come up, and they will the focus needs to be on calm, rational resolution, finding solutions together.
Respecting independence is also mentioned strongly.
Very much so. Avoiding controlling behavior, respecting personal space and privacy, and importantly, supporting each other's individual growth.
Career, studies, hobbies.
Whatever it is, growing together based on mutual respect, that's seen as vital.
And doing things together.
Yes, actively cultivating shared activities, common interests, finding hobbies you both enjoy, participating in family or social events together.
Like sports, learning something new, volunteering, maybe.
Exactly. Things that deepen the emotional connection, create shared positive memories, and build a warmer, more lively atmosphere in the relationship or family.
Okay. Now, the source concludes its, really expansive look at the world with this final, almost abstract perspective. Viewing society itself as a kind of energy field.
A large, precise energy field.
Yeah, it's a powerful metaphor.
Where resources, information, even emotions are constantly flowing, transforming, impacting everyone inside it.
It's a compelling way to think about it. The source breaks it down into different types of energy, like economic energy,
Capital flowing to where the returns are highest. Or labor moving for better opportunities, bringing skills, ideas, globalization knitting economies together through trade-driving development, but also potentially creating those gaps we discussed.
Then there's information energy, which feels incredibly relevant now.
Hugely dynamic in the digital age. The speed, the breadth, unprecedented. The internet connects everyone instantly. Social media makes things go viral.
For good or ill.
Right. News media shapes opinion massively. But the source warns about the downsides too. Information overload, fake news.
Creating confusion, instability, like negative energy in the field.
Exactly. And then, moving beyond the tangible, the source talks about emotional energy.
Using imagery like warm sun versus cold frost in relationships.
Yeah, showing how it directly affects how close-knit or fragmented communities feel. Positive communities care, trust, mutual help. They build cohesion, collective strength.
Whereas cold in different environments.
Breed conflict, weaken that collective energy. The source gives examples. The outpouring of compassion after disasters, donations, volunteering. That's positive energy providing real aid.
Or even small daily acts. A smile, helping someone.
Simple greetings. The source sees these as actively building positive bridges, tiny ripples of positive energy.
And the negative side.
Starkly illustrated by things like cyberbullying, malicious comments, slander, inciting hatred online, causing real harm, real instability in the social field.
And this brings it right back to the individual, doesn't it?
It does. The source uses the image of each person being like a stone dropped in a lake.
Your actions create ripples.
Her energy spreads outwards. Someone cultivating and spreading positivity, optimism, resilience, kindness. They inspire others. They add warmth, hope.
And the opposite.
Someone spreading negativity, cynicism, hostility. They contribute to anxiety, unease. They help create a more negative atmosphere overall.
Okay, so based on this whole concept, society as an energy field, the source finishes with a kind of call to action.
A clear call to action, yes, for each of us.
What's the core message?
It really emphasizes the importance of consciously choosing to be positive, to actively spread positive energy, and just as importantly, to resist spreading negative energy.
And it starts with yourself.
It has to start with oneself, the source argues.
Are there specific suggestions?
Yes, things like participating in public welfare, community initiatives, actively caring for others around you, simply advocating for civilized, respectful behavior in everyday life, injecting warmth and kindness where you can.
And online, with information.
Be rational. Be critical. Don't just passively accept or, crucially, spread unverified news or rumors. You risk becoming a conduit for negative energy if you do.
Even your work, your studies.
Contributing your expertise there is framed as driving positive energy in your field, contributing to progress, well-being.
So the final thought, the overarching idea is, despite the harsh backdrop.
Despite that perceived harshness, that heaven and earth are not humane, reality, human society needs collective effort. We have to consciously strive to create a society built on love, care, fairness, justice, harmony, beauty.
It's the collective cultivation of positive energy.
That's the force, the source suggests, that can drive us towards a brighter future, allow humanity to paint its best chapters against that fundamental reality.
So wow, what does this all mean for you listening? We've taken a really deep dive into one source's powerful, maybe challenging perspective on the world's operating rules.
Yeah, from that relentless competition in nature and society to our own inner struggles with desire, the shifting sands of relationships, and this idea of society as an energy field.
It's definitely a view that highlights some harsh realities that might underpin existence. But importantly, it doesn't just stop there, does it?
No, it also offers paths, ways forward, both internal psychological paths and external social ones. Ways for individuals to find peace, navigate the challenges, and consciously try to contribute positively.
It really leaves us with a fundamental question to think about, doesn't it? Drawn straight from the source's core message. Given this view that fundamental, perhaps harsh rules underpin existence and maybe even human nature, can we really transcend them? Can we build a truly just, truly harmonious society for everyone?
Or are we perhaps always going to be navigating a world where resources are limited, competition is fierce, and desire is this powerful, ever-present force?
And maybe on a more personal level.
Yeah.
How do you see yourself cultivating that positive energy or seeking that inner harmony, not in spite of this perspective, but maybe because you understand this particular way of looking at how the world operates?
It definitely gives you a lot to reflect on.
It certainly does. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the world's operating rules as presented by this, well, incredibly thought-provoking source.